After an unsuccessful search for work following the end of World War I. The small shop at 257 Manchester Street, Christchurch, and was a one-man operation for a while. One of the reasons cited is the general move away from formal wear to casual wear.
Nah, don't buy it. No. Sorry. No. There is a huge renaissance in men's fashion where high-end formal wear is definitely back in. If you are losing out because you haven't just changed with the times and upped your fashion game, that's your fault for not being a reactive brand.
Well, I recognise your sartorial elegance when I walked in the room. But it is a reality. You walk into lawyer's office, even the top-end lawyer's office, unless they're going to court, they're not wearing a suit and a tie. It is a reality. And the other thing is that you can go to, I won't name it, but a more mainstream brand, and you can buy quite a decent suit for a quarter of the price.
And that was one of the key things they said. They said, look, you know, we love being in business. We loved our store. We've got a lot of clientele. But how can you compete with the fast fashions of the day? The likes of the Zaras or the Barkers or...
But it's so obvious how you compete with that. You redefine your brand so you offer a unique selling point which improves people's identity. Look at brands that have reinvented themselves over the years, right? I mean, look at car brands are great at this. They reinvent themselves to model with the changing times. The bringing in of the Prius remodeled Toyota, right? So what you have to do is you have to change your brand to show what consumers want now. You can't compete on a mass scale with products, and you're not going to compete on a mass scale. So go niche, go expensive, and then make a big deal out of that. Look at Lonely Lingerie. They did that. They were competing against mass brands from China. They thought, what do? We go niche. Massively successful.
And the problem with Munns, it wasn't quite high end and it wasn't mass. So it was caught in the middle. There's a shop up the road. I'm wearing their suit at the moment, and their suits are not cheap, but it's about service. It's about follow up.
I hear you.
You know, and they like you. They like you as the individual, and they know you.
Yeah.
So part of it is changing with the times.
Changing with the time, parting with the time.
And also offer something to your consumer's identity. People buy expensive clothes because they want to feel a certain way. So give them a feeling to feel. Make them feel elaborate or special or unique or crazy, and work out that's what you're selling. You're not just selling a cheap mass-produced suit.
But what you're trying to tell a business of 100 years what to do.
Well, but they're going bankrupt. They need advice.
It's also a family-owned business, and they probably in some way, shape have either said, "Yep, we're closing up," or diversified in something else. So, it's. I think it's a number of issues, and Munns is just caught in that space.
And on what Shane was said in terms of the dressing down, do you see that? I mean, because Shane, there is that aspect of what Verita says. There is that sort of that culture of actually getting a nice suit. You got your beard, you got your thing going on. You know, people do like to dress up, right?
Yeah, I don't think we're dressing down. Some traditionally stuffy people like lawyers and doctors are more casual now, but what you're seeing is that people who used to be more casual are now investing more into their outfits, so they're getting smarter. Look at graphic designers. They spend huge amounts of money on their outfits.
Right.
Oh, they might, but the software designers don't. That's for sure.
I suppose briefly my angle is here is another New Zealand company gone down at the whims of the global winds.
You just have to adjust to it. You just have to have a smart and reactive business strategy.
All right.
Kia ora.
Hey, Shane.
Yeah, awesome.
Shane is a real New Zealander. Could not agree more with him. Great panellist. There you go,
Cheers.
Shane. Your first go. Shane Tapo, Verita Johnson. You both have been wonderful this afternoon.
Thanks,
I'm Wallace Chapman. I'm back tomorrow at 3:45. See you then. Checkpoint up next.
Mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, we reveal death threats against EQC. Security ramps up following an anonymous letter threatening the safety of staff. The Finance Minister reckons the fees-free tertiary policy still gets a pass, even though the government is redirecting a chunky part of its funding elsewhere. And surprise, it's found $1 billion down the back of the couch ahead of the budget. Who gets that? And why are police raiding gun owners when the firearms amnesty's not over yet? Show us the money. Auckland businesses out of pocket because of the City Rail link construction want compensation. And Vodafone Britain hangs up on its Kiwi connection as the country's largest mobile company is sold for billions. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Police Commissioner is rejecting claims the police had information that could have prevented the March 15 mosque attacks. Mike Bush is responding to comments from the Imam of the Al-Noor Mosque, Gamal Fouda, that a suspicious man entered the mosque 3 weeks before the attacks.
Imam Foda has been reported saying the man claimed he was there to learn about Islam, but would not provide his name, and that despite the footage being provided to the police, no action was taken. He says the man was not the same one who was arrested over the shootings. Mike Bush says questions over whether more could have been done to prevent the attacks are for the Royal Commission, but he's asked the Commission for permission to respond to the claims. He says the police are not aware of any information which could have prevented the attacks. Kei o te tahi ahau, ko konanyang tēnei.
The United Nations Secretary-General has spoken out against the spread of hate speech on a visit to the Al-Noor Mosque in Christchurch. Antonio Guterres laid flowers in remembrance of those who died in the mosque shooting on March 15th. He later visited the Linwood Mosque, which also was attacked on the same day. Mr Guterres says he wants the UN to respond to hate speech. Mr Guterres says media is being exploited as a platform for bigotry.
Hate speech is spreading like wildfire in social media. We must distinguish it. And there is no room for hate speech, online or offline.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. The Finance Minister says the reallocation of nearly $200 million in funding from the fees-free scheme isn't a sign the policy is failing. In his first pre-budget speech, Grant Robertson has announced that enrolments in the program, which pays for the first year of tertiary education fees, did not meet initial forecasts. The funding will be redirected towards reforming vocational training. Mr Robertson says the assumption fees-free would lead to a 15% increase in enrolments was always a generous one. He says the fact enrolments were below that doesn't mean the program isn't working.
Far from it. I mean, this is tens of thousands of New Zealanders have benefited from the scheme. This is simply a recognition that not all of the money that was allocated for it is being used. And now we've got the opportunity to put that towards a vocational education system that's delivering people with the skills that they need.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson. The brand new engines on Air New Zealand's latest jets are already having gearbox parts replaced amid fears the problem could lead to engines shutting down. It affects the airline's 8 Airbus A320 and A321neos, the first of which was delivered in November. The engines were marketed as a game changer, promising significant reductions in fuel use, emissions and noise. But they've been beset by problems, including warped rotor blades and leaky seals. The Civil Aviation Authority says there have been in-flight engine shutdowns around the world, but with the parts now being replaced, there's no need to restrict the aircraft's operations. An analyst says the decision by Air New Zealand's top executives to take a pay freeze for a year is another signal the economy is slowing down. The airline says price rises will add $200 million to the jet fuel bill this year, so the airline is looking at where it can save money. An aviation analyst and head of private wealth research at Forsyth Bar, Rob Mercer, says freezing the salaries sends a message that it's not just house prices slowing down, but also air travel bookings.
I don't think the actual savings of the executive team here is going to amount to a huge amount, but it's important signalling that they can see that the economic outlook the company faces is putting downside pressure on its profitability.
Last year, Mr Luxon's total remuneration topped $4 million. Air New Zealand has said it expects its annual profit to be 25% less than previously forecast. The escalating trade dispute between the United States and China has knocked the local share market lower. The benchmark NZX 50 share market index has closed about 0.5% lower, just over 55 points after hitting a record high yesterday. However, the market is off its lows as the initial knee-jerk reaction eased. Markets throughout Asia are also weaker. A Christchurch cancer sufferer has finally had a breakthrough in her years-long battle with EQC to fix problems with her earthquake-damaged home. Beverly Guy is one of more than 2,000 people who still have an insurance claims open with the government's earthquake insurer. Logan Church reports.
Parts of Beverly Guy's Kainga cottage started sinking during the Canterbury earthquakes and kept sinking after EQC had repaired it. But debate over what was earthquake damage meant 8.5 years later no settlement had been reached. Ms. Guy, who has leukemia, says she was at her wit's end and was worried that her house would collapse if another quake struck before repairs could be done. But after Checkpoint got involved with her case, this week EQC decided to offer Ms. Guy a $50,000 settlement, which she has now accepted. In Christchurch, Logan Church.
It's 5:05. The Kiwis forward Adam Blair has been put on notice by Warriors coach Stephen Kearney, being told to lift his form or he'll struggle to get back in the NRL side. Suspension ruled Blair out of the Warriors' come-from-behind win over St George Illawarra at the weekend, their first victory in 5 games. The Warriors play Penrith in Sydney on Friday night, and Kearney says there's no guarantee Blair will make the lineup.
I'm not too sure yet. I thought the guys that were in the 17 last week did a pretty good job. So there might be some differing opinions amongst the coaching group, but we'll have to wait and see.
The Warriors coach Stephen Kearney. Minor premiers The Pulse will get to host the final of the New Zealand Netball Premiership after all. All 3 of the side's home venues were already booked out on Sunday, June 2nd, leaving Netball New Zealand scrambling to secure a local venue. The final will now be held the following day on Queen's Birthday Monday at Te Rauparaha Arena in Porirua. The Wellington Phoenix star goalkeeper Philip Curto is leaving the football club after just 1 season. The A-League goalkeeper of the year has signed with Melbourne expansion club Western United, where now former Phoenix coach Mark Rudin is tipped to end up next season. And the renowned 1970s New Zealand horse Balmerino has been inducted into the Australian Racing Hall of Fame. In 1977, Balmerino, arguably the most travelled horse of its era, had 39 starts in 6 countries, clocking up 21 wins and 9 second places. That's the news.
A call to action.
We have to make a start for the security of New Zealanders.
A call for change.
Our system doesn't work. So New Zealanders, if you want it to be different, you need to let the people in government know.
And a call to keep it as it is.
Yeah, well, don't lose the hokey pokey. It's a Kiwi icon.
Always the flavour of the day. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dunn, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, can a female athlete have too much natural testosterone? And after 10, Israel's Prime Minister gets a 5th term in the job. Journalist and author Anchal Pfeffer says it might come at a cost. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The northern and central North Island from Northland to Taumaranui, Taihape and Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods, isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mainly fine, a few showers early tomorrow morning. Westerly gales south of Hastings tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington as well as Marlborough and Nelson. A period of widespread heavy showers early tomorrow with possible thunderstorms, then clearing south of Manawatu. Canterbury, rain about the Western Ranges and showers elsewhere this evening, fine weather tomorrow. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls and squally thunderstorms, easing to showers later tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered rain today, a few thunderstorms about Southland, showers tomorrow especially in the south, westerly gales especially tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a period of rain tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 5. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The fees-free tertiary policy, success or failure, that story coming up. And plus we go live to Paris for the Christchurch Call Summit and what the Vodafone sale means for customers. But we begin tonight in Christchurch, where Checkpoint can confirm police are investigating a threat to EQC staff after receiving a concerning letter earlier this month. Our reporter Logan Church joins us now from Christchurch. Logan, what more can you tell us about the letter?
Hi Lisa, yes, this morning EQC confirmed that it received an anonymous letter at the start of this month in which the safety of its staff was threatened. In that statement, Deputy Chief Executive Renee Walker said security had then been increased at all of its offices. I was actually at EQC's offices yesterday filming an interview for a story which will air later on Checkpoint tonight, but we actually had to pass 4 security guards to get anywhere near the areas where the EQC staff actually work, and there was also no EQC branding visible around the site. While no one from EQC was available today for an interview, in that statement we received this morning, Deputy Chief Executive Renee Walker said that as soon as the threat had been received, security measures were implemented right across EQC's offices and buildings, and the police were of course notified. The threat itself though was non-specific and not focused on any particular address or building. To read directly though from that statement, Renee Walker says there is no excuse to abuse, threaten or even assault EQC staff and those working for us. While we may not always get things right, our people turn up on a daily basis to try and help people in the best way they know how. But of course that letter was received anonymously, and the identity of the person who sent that letter remains unknown. Ms Walker is asking for anyone who might know anything about this to come forward and contact the police. Now, we do not have much detail as to the contents of the letter and what threats were made. However, calls from our producer to EQC's board chairman, Sir Michael Cullen, this afternoon confirmed that there had been repeated threats, including one that referenced the recent mosque attacks in March this year down in Christchurch. They said that a member of EQC's executive flew down from Wellington to Christchurch to reassure staff of their safety, and the police are now conducting a threat assessment.
Do we know if the Minister has been briefed about this?
Well, this afternoon, the Minister's office confirmed that Megan Woods had been briefed on the threats, but she is currently on a plane and her office was reluctant to go into more detail while a police investigation was underway.
Thank you for that, Logan. Logan Church joining us live there from our Christchurch office. The Finance Minister insists the fees-free tertiary policy is not a failure, despite reallocating a sizable part of the funding to polytechs due to low demand. The policy, a Labour Party campaign promise, has been in place since the start of 2018 and pays for the first year of full-time study for school leavers and for those who have done fewer than 6 months tertiary study in the past. Initial estimates were it would cost about $350 million a year, but now about $200 million will be diverted due to fewer students taking advantage of the policy than expected. The government budgeted for 80,000 students when it first launched the policy, but that was revised down to 50,000 once it became apparent the uptake wouldn't be that high. But National has criticised the policy in the past as poorly targeted and says today's announcement proves it's a flop. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The government's gearing up for its May 30th budget, the Wellbeing Budget. In a speech to the Wellington Chamber of Commerce, Finance Minister Grant Robertson said ministers had identified about $1 billion of spending that was no longer a priority.
One example of this was underspending on the fees-free program due to enrolments not meeting initial forecasts. This funding, some $197 million, is now to be redirected to the implementation of the reform of vocational education.
He told reporters afterwards it was not an admission of failure.
Far from it. I mean, this is tens of thousands of New Zealanders have benefited from the scheme. This is simply a recognition that not all of the money that was allocated for it is being used. And now we've got the opportunity to put that towards a vocational education system that's delivering people with the skills that they need.
But Mr Robertson said the government could have done better communicating who was eligible for a year's fees-free.
It's not just about immediately what someone might do at the end of secondary school. This is a policy that's open for workplace training as well, in terms of people who've never studied before. And I think the Prime Minister has said that we haven't, perhaps got that message out, that it isn't just about post-secondary schools.
However, National's tertiary spokesperson Shane Reti says tertiary enrolments have been on the decline for the past few years, which shows how ineffective the policy has been.
It's a flagship Labour coalition government policy and it's clearly failing. We know that because the cabinet documents show that they forecast 80,000 learners in fees-free, and in fact by end of year it was projecting closer to 50,000, so a massive reduction in what they were expecting.
He says the policy should be thoroughly reviewed.
We've always said that it was money poorly spent, that it was poorly targeted. We understand the ambition of getting greater access, more affordable access. We understand that, but this hasn't been the tool to do that.
Michael Gilchrist is the president of the Tertiary Education Union. He says the policy has boosted enrolments in regional New Zealand, but agrees not everyone is aware it's not just for school leavers. But he says the union's thrilled Polytechs will be the beneficiaries.
The government has bailed out institutions, but that is not a satisfactory solution at the moment because those bailouts often require breaking even this year. And we have been very concerned that we would lose critical capacity and the Polytechs, through job cuts, would be unable to respond.
The Vice-Chancellor of Auckland University, Stuart McCutcheon, says universities have long been underfunded and better consideration needs to be given to make sure money is going where it should. He says it's no surprise the fees-free policy has not always helped the people it was intended for.
There is a general decline in the number of students leaving the secondary sector ready for university. That's a demographic issue, although it's not huge. The other is that there are very few students for whom a year of fees is really the limiting factor. Many students, particularly from lower decile schools, will struggle to meet the entry requirements for the universities.
Labour's campaign policy in 2017 was to introduce fees free at the start of 2018, then gradually extend it to 2 years free in 2021 and provide 3 years free in 2024. Mr Robertson says no decision has been made about whether the extension will actually happen, and it's a decision that does not need to be made this term. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It's 16 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. While Finance Minister Grant Robertson declined to be interviewed on Checkpoint, we also invited Education Minister Chris Hipkins on the program, but he was unavailable. National Party leader Simon Bridges, though, was happy to oblige, and he joins us now. Good evening. The government is doing...
Lisa.
Hi, the government's doing the right thing here, isn't it? Redirecting unspent money to priority areas. Wouldn't you agree that that's fiscally responsible?
Well, I suppose it's fiscally responsible to stop throwing good money after bad. I mean, there's no doubt Labor's policies are falling like dominoes, and this is the latest in fees free. And you're right, as it said in the intro package there, we have been hugely sceptical of it. But then you go to what it's being spent on, and it's going into the government's crazy Polytech ideas, which I'm sure will be bound to be another policy fail in this area. And actually, that's what teachers are looking at. They see that, and that's why their strike is striking in unprecedented numbers later this month.
Why is this a policy fail? Because you do have 50,000 students who've taken advantage of free fees. This was not just about raising the numbers, it was about getting rid of generation debt. So how can you characterise that as a fail?
It was always going to be a fail in that it's a huge waste of New Zealanders' money, and it's entirely untargeted. People who are going anyway receiving this money, only 6% of people getting it have said it's important to them, and that's a University of Canterbury study. But then you go back and you say, well, actually, heck, if the very policy that was meant to get more people going to university, Polytechs and Wānanga, to democratise that, if you like, is resulting in fewer students, look, that is an epic public policy fail.
They would argue, the government would argue that prior to implementing this policy that university tertiary enrolments were dropping off. In fact, in the previous year, 5,000 fewer students enrolled. So they would argue that they have stemmed the flow.
Save, I suppose, Lisa, it's pretty hard for them to say that when their cabinet paper shows an estimate of 80,000. Today, Grant Robertson says 50,000. And in fact, what we also know is Chris Hipkins has documents that tell him the real figures, which I think will show that it's gone backwards in real terms. That is, there's fewer students in various tertiary organisations today than there were, last year, perhaps even the year before. But he won't release that detail. So, on their own terms, it didn't meet where they forecast. In fact, it's much back from that. And that's why they've freed up some money from, a real public policy fail here.
So if National was in government, you'd ditch this altogether? No free fees?
Well, obviously, we'll make those sort of announcements.
You can't come on and say it's a complete policy fail and then not give us a commitment either way as to what you would do. That would seem a little disingenuous, wouldn't it?
Lisa, there are some small benefits from being in opposition, and this is one of them.
What, hedging your bets?
No secret. but I make no secret of the fact we're hugely sceptical. This has been a real waste of New Zealanders' money. It hasn't worked. And, what we're seeing is it's
How can you say it's an extreme waste of money? It's an extreme waste of money and a policy fail, yet give no commitment either way whether you would maintain it or ditch it?
There's so many things I'd love to say, Lisa, but
well, here's your platform. Say them.
We'll be outlining our positive plans around what we would do next year, not this one.
Okay, so they found $1 billion down the back of the couch, right, by looking at things that are no longer a priority. Give me your number one spend. Where would you put the $1 billion, the extra?
Well, I've made last year an announcement that actually I think we need smaller class size ratios, that is more teachers to students. That's important. I've also made it clear that as you've got cost of living rising massively under this government, rents up $50 a week, petrol up $2.21 around about at the moment.
So a tax cut. You'd give a tax cut, would you?
I have a bill in Parliament, the tax indexation, which means that taxes don't rise by stealth, and actually as cost of living go up, people get real tax relief there. That would be another priority for me. And look, before the election, we'll be announcing more. You know what I think the real problem was, though, in Grant Robertson's speech is ultimately, when you look at it all, there were plenty of excuses for a weakening economy, but there was no plan to grow the economy. He's got this pretty nebulous...
Mr Bridges, you won't disclose your plan.
No.
You're criticising him for not having detail. You won't tell us either way whether you would scrap the free fees policy.
I could tell you this quite clearly, Lisa. If there was an election called today, I could roll out my plan. We've already this year put out a comprehensive environmental document. We are next week on Monday putting out...
Yeah, I'm asking you about free fees policy, so you won't say either way. Okay. Hey, I just want to ask you a couple of other questions while I've got you on the line, which is a story has surfaced today in the Herald regarding the police investigation into text messages sent to your former MP, Jamie Lee Roth. It seems that investigation is stalled because of a lack of cooperation. So I'm just wondering, do you have confidence in your Invercargill MP, Sarah Dowie, who has allegedly sent some of these texts? Do you have confidence in her?
Firstly, I'm not going to speculate on what is or isn't in the story. I haven't read.
Not asking you to do that. Asking you to express either way. I'm asking you to express either way whether you have confidence in your MP, Sarah Dowie. Not asking you to delve into the police investigation. Confidence is the issue here. Do you have it in her or not?
I have complete confidence in Sarah Dowie. I was with her on Friday and Saturday of last week in Invercargill. We got a great reception. She's fighting for their SIT, their polytechnic down there that Chris Hipkins has other ideas for a Catlins Reserve. She's doing a great job championing the local issues.
We're running out of time, so sorry to interrupt, but have you told her that you expect her as an MP in the National Party to cooperate with the police in their investigation?
Well, I wouldn't be here telling you what I have or haven't said. And as I was saying...
Why not? This is an issue of your leadership. It's an issue of your leadership and your expectations as a leader. So is it your expectation that an MP, one of your MPs, you would expect them to cooperate with a police investigation, and have you told her that that's what your expectation is?
It's pretty simple, Lisa. I'm not going to comment on something that may be before the police.
Not asking you to comment on the investigation. I'm asking you to comment on your leadership. So,
But you actually are, by asking these questions. And I've been pretty clear with you, I'm not going to do that. I've got real confidence in a great local MP who's doing a great job for the people of Invercargill.
Former leader of the National Party, Bill English, he made it very clear to Todd Barclay, when Todd Barclay found himself in a similar position, that he expected Mr Barclay to cooperate with the police. Have standards changed or dropped since you came into the leadership, or can you confirm that you would expect the same?
I think New Zealanders have seen my style of leadership. They've seen the strength I bring in terms of dealing with bad behaviour when I've seen it. But I'm not going to characterise these things for the reasons I've already outlined.
Thank you for joining us. That is Simon Bridges, the leader of the National Party. It is 24 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch with your feedback. Text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Prime Minister says tech companies will face questions about whether they're chasing profits at the expense of operating ethically ahead of the Christchurch call in Paris. The summit will see tech company and country leaders sign up to an agreement that aims to prevent the promotion and organisation of terrorism online in the wake of the Christchurch terror attack in which 51 people died. Some countries like Australia and Germany have already implemented crackdowns such as penalties on social media companies for violent content. Something Jacinda Ardern won't rule in or out for New Zealand legislation down the track. She says tech companies also have to take responsibility for change. Our political reporter Joe Moyer is in Paris and joins us now. Hi Joe, who's going to be there representing the global tech players?
Hi, Lisa. So in terms of the tech companies, there's some obvious no-shows in the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook. But then Twitter is sending its CEO, Jack Dorsey, and there's representatives from other companies, including Amazon and Microsoft, who will be here. So Mr. Zuckerberg has spoken directly with the Prime Minister, but even she has said herself it would have been preferable to have him here in Paris. I guess if you look at it from the Facebook end, they're the company responsible for the video of the Christchurch terror attack going viral. So then, no, them not sort of fronting up, they're probably being seen to be not taking it as seriously as Ms. Ardern would like. But then you can argue the fact that so many companies are actually turning up in Paris to even talk about making changes to their platform is a huge win in itself, really, especially given some of the questions that they're likely to face. So the Prime Minister held a press conference here in Paris yesterday and was clear that tech companies will be getting asked about the harm that comes from chasing profits online. So companies are unlikely to want to be sharing the algorithms they use to boost revenue. But Ms. Ardern says leaders have to ask the question of whether or not commercial imperatives are driving certain behaviours that are ultimately harming people. So she says there can't be a case of all profit, no responsibility. And just in terms of the heads of government coming, Ms. Ardern is still holding out hope here that someone from the Donald Trump administration in the US will be sent.
So how big of a risk is this, really? Because she's on the world stage here and she's trying to make headway on what is a difficult issue. What happens if nothing happens?
Yeah, of course there's a risk that this will just become a talk fest, and obviously there's already been plenty of criticism back home about that. The Prime Minister found herself the centre of the international stage after her handling of the aftermath of the Christchurch attack, and she's really taken that momentum and brought it here to Paris. So while she has the backing of the likes of France, Germany, Britain and Canada will be here, it's going to be hard to see any real change until the US gets on board. And even countries like China, which have a huge presence in the technology space, all eyes will be on her back home, both politically and I guess from voters as well, as to whether she can pull this off. If she does, it really will be significant though.
And what are we expecting to happen ahead of the summit?
So my day is just starting here in Paris, and on the agenda is the Voices for Action Summit. Now, this is a meeting of social media experts and civil society leaders. That meeting's been chaired here today by Jordan Carter from Internet New Zealand. Basically, it's sort of a stakeholder engagement ahead of the big Christchurch Call Summit here tomorrow. So both Emmanuel Macron and Ms. Ardern will attend this Voices for Action workshop. It's going to be closed to the media, but they'll hold a joint press conference afterwards to discuss what's come out of it. That may actually include a few new ideas to feed into the action plan that these tech companies and countries will actually sign up to tomorrow. The Prime Minister's also doing some international media while she's here. She has an interview with CNN today, and that will air at about 5 a.m. Wednesday morning in New Zealand.
Thanks, Joe. That is our political reporter, Joe Moyer, who's in Paris for the Christchurch Call Summit. The country's largest mobile company, Vodafone, is being sold for $3.4 billion. Local and Canadian investors are buying it from Vodafone Group in Britain, dashing an initial plan for it to list on the New Zealand share market. Talk of the sale emerged on Friday, and the deal was sealed over the weekend before being announced publicly today. Our business reporter, Madison Reedy, has more.
Vodafone's advertising campaign says the future is exciting, but no one expected its own future would see it bought out. Vodafone is being sold to two investment companies, the local utilities investor Infratil and the Canadian firm Brookfield Asset Management. They're buying it for $3.4 billion. Infratil's chief executive, Marko Bogoyevsky, says they've spent several months eyeing Vodafone because it believes it's a good fit for its portfolio.
We can see it as the highest quality infrastructure asset that's available in this market. It happens to be number one in mobile. It has an extensive position in fixed line. It's got a fantastic management team, and it's in an industry we think is going to be really important to the New Zealand economy and competitiveness for a long time. So it's sort of almost the perfect asset.
As part of the deal, Vodafone has signed an agreement with its parent company in Britain to keep its name and keep offering the same services. Vodafone's chief executive, Jason Paris, says that means it'll be business as usual for its thousands of customers.
Everything from brand, roaming, IoT, Vodafone procurement services, Vodafone TV, each of those will continue to be evaluated and invested in, and as long as they create value for our business and value for our customers, then we have the ability to maintain that for as long as we need to, and as long as it makes sense from a Vodafone Group perspective.
But the sale itself is a change of plan for Vodafone. It was set to list on the New Zealand share market after its bid to merge with Sky Television failed. Mr Paris told RNZ Business last year that his main focus was to get the company ready for the NZX, but now he's saying he'll have more time for other ideas.
A couple of years of distraction on the Sky merger and then a potential IPO. So the leadership team hasn't been really able to focus on the business and on customers for a couple of years. So this kind of certainty is going to be give us a significant boost.
An analyst with FNZC, Ari Decker, says for that reason the sale is a bit of a shame.
Clearly that is a shame for the NZX and the local market, but there's a lot of private money chasing assets as well, and so this move to sell to a consortium of Infratil and Brookfield versus listing is not inconsistent with what's happening with a lot of other assets.
Vodafone is undergoing a restructure, axing jobs and moving some operations overseas. Ari Decker says its new owners will look to trim more fat off its books, which isn't good news for staff whose jobs are already on the line.
Cutting costs and removing headcount, I suspect that'll be no different for Vodafone. There'll be areas where they do look to reinvest. As an example, may not be the case, but in media and with their Vodafone TV platform, they may look to put more energy into that while cutting costs elsewhere.
The multi-billion-dollar sale of Vodafone is pending approval from the Overseas Investment Office and the Commerce Commission. It's likely to go ahead unless the Commission takes issue with Infratil's stake in Trustpower, which also sells broadband. Since Vodafone has already had its share of regulatory roadblocks, it'll want to do everything it can to ensure its own future is as exciting as it hopes. For Checkpoint, I'm Madison Reedy.
On RNZ National, good news for a Christchurch cancer sufferer battling EQC over her sinking house. Auckland businesses left out of pocket because of the City Rail link construction demand compensation, and tributes flow for Hollywood's favourite girl next door, Doris Day, who has died aged 97. We would love to hear from you about anything that you've heard on the program today. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And we're a little late with the headlines. Sorry, Susanna. Here she is.
The police are investigating an anonymous threat made against staff at the Earthquake Commission that references the Christchurch mosque attacks. The Commission says there have been repeated threats, including one that threatened staff safety. EQC has heightened security at all its offices. The UN Secretary-General has praised this country's approach to climate change. Antonio Guterres has met with Ngāi Tahu in Christchurch to discuss issues around climate change and global warming. Mr Guterres says initiatives taken by both the government and community groups are adapted to modern times but also take into account community interests. The Finance Minister says the lower enrolments in the scheme, which pays for the first year of tertiary education fees, is not a sign the policy is failing. Grant Robertson has announced that enrolments in the program did not meet initial forecasts and funding will be redirected towards vocational training. The brand new engines on Air New Zealand's latest jets are already having gearbox parts replaced amid fears the problem could lead to engines shutting down. It affects the airline's 8 Airbus A320 and A321neos. The Civil Aviation Authority says there have been in-flight engine shutdowns around the world, but with the parts now being replaced, there's no need to restrict the aircraft's operations. An analyst says the decision by Air New Zealand's top executives to take a pay freeze for a year is another signal the economy is slowing down. The airline says price rises will add $200 million to the jet fuel bill this year, so the airline is looking at where it can save money. A Christchurch cancer sufferer has finally had a breakthrough in her 8-year-long battle with EQC to fix problems with her earthquake-damaged home. Beverly Guy is one of more than 2,000 people who still have insurance claims open with the government's earthquake insurer. Those are the latest headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint, and Nona Palcios joined me in the studio for business. Nona, so we do love a good house price story. Everybody seems to. They have slumped across the country. What's going on with the market?
Yeah, interesting. Sales numbers are down, and specifically, right across the whole country. There wasn't a single region that had an increase in the number of sales. They were all down. Auckland, interestingly, was down quite a lot. It was something like 16% down, which is extraordinary. And it's taking a little bit longer to sell houses in Auckland as well, which is interesting considering that the demand is still outstripping the supply. So at the same time, prices are falling in a number of regions. Auckland is one, but overall the median price in Auckland has stayed the same for 3 years at $850,000. And when you look at national prices, they were a little bit up on the year earlier, but no different from last month at $585,000. So yeah, the housing market is slowing down. It's slowing down pretty much everywhere. Economists are expecting the regions to also slow down, even though there were still some record increases in some far-flung areas. So
are they saying why? Because obviously interest rates are
interest rates are lower, but it's harder to get credit. Banks are becoming far more picky about who they lend money to, and there is a lot of uncertainty out there in terms of the wholesale money market. That's where banks go and get their money. Deposits, for example, are down locally because interest rates are low. So if you're saving for whatever it is, putting your money in the bank is only going to get you a very small interest rate, if at all. So people are looking for other ways of making money, investments, and so on. And that means that the banks themselves have less money to lend, and they're being more picky about who they'll give it to.
Interesting. Hey, Grant Robertson, Finance Minister, gave a pre-budget speech today, and they basically found $1 billion down the back of the couch. So he went out and told his ministers to find me savings, 1% savings in every portfolio, didn't he?
He found a whole $1 billion. He has a lot of money, and he'll need it too, because he also talked about the economy slowing. That's something that we just heard as well as in the news, and we've seen it's happening across the world. And so he's expecting he's saying that the economy is forecast to grow 2.5% this year and 2.9% next year. But he did say that depends a lot on what happens in the world, because at the moment, with the escalating trade tensions between the United States and China, that certainly has put a damper on the markets everywhere. We've seen that in our own market today. We fell just over 0.5%, 55 points down to 10,072. Now, part of that was also Infratil, as we talked about before with the Vodafone deal. They're going to have to raise money for that. The market's like, yeah, how much is that going to cost? And so that share price dropped nearly 3%. That's a big company, by 13 cents to $4.47. Now, our dollar is doing a little bit better, though, and that's just because of just a bit of a correction there in the U.S. dollar. There's some question marks over how well the U.S. economy is going to fare. So our dollar is sitting at 65.9 U.S. cents, just under that 66 cent mark, but up 94.7 against the Australian, which is better than we were yesterday.
Shall I guess the pound? 51.
50.8. Pretty close, Lisa.
Close enough.
Pretty close.
Thanks,
Pretty
Nona.
close.
Nona Palcier with business news there. It is about 20 minutes away from 6. Let's return now to Christchurch, where a cancer sufferer has finally had a breakthrough in her years-long battle with EQC to fix ongoing problems with her earthquake-damaged home. Parts of Beverly Guy's cottage started sinking during the earthquakes, but after EQC repaired that, it kept sinking. Beverly was at her wit's end and was feeling completely overwhelmed. She was worried that her house would collapse if another quake struck before repairs could be done. But after Checkpoint got involved with her case, she has finally got some good news. She shared her story with our South Island reporter Logan Church and videographer Simon Rogers.
Beverly Guy bought the small cottage in Kainga, a stone's throw south of the Waimakariri River, shortly before the first Canterbury earthquake in September 2010.
I looked after my mum till she died, and then I wanted to go and live in the country, and this little house was for sale, so I bought it. But because it's just 10 minutes to the Palms, it's not far out of town, but it's country.
And you're right by the sea as well.
In the Waimak River, in the forest behind me.
It's nothing fancy. It has 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, and plenty of outdoor shed space. Some of it was looking tired before the quakes. Bev, as she likes to be known, tells me parts of the building are likely to be almost 100 years old. And the location is beautiful. It backs onto a forestry block. The house survived the September earthquake pretty well, but come the February quake, she was inside that forestry block.
I had a bowl that I was going to put wasp bait in, and I was standing here holding it on here with the hammer, and I was going bang, 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 and I heard this tremendous bang behind me, and then me and the tree went right out there, it flew right back, I reckon 45 degrees. When I was coming back, I looked down the road, they're all like that. Got up, all the sand there getting back to my house was like moving like a boiling type of thing. I just hung on to the post. The water tank on top of my house was just flying everywhere, and the pool, the water's going everywhere.
And her cottage suffered damage, serious damage.
That floor went down, the lounge floor went down facing north. It also went down facing south, and also the bathroom and toilet area, the laundry, that went down as well in one corner.
Bev reported the damage to EQC and they responded relatively quickly.
Well, I put in a claim for the house to be fixed, and some people came out and did it. I was one of the first people to be done.
But things started going amiss straight away.
They were not supposed to touch the kitchen. It sloped down quite a lot, but it was not earthquake damage, and I made sure they knew it. It was not earthquake damage. I'm not asking for that to be fixed.
It was pre-existing damage.
Yeah. So, anyway, they came out, and the first thing they did was lift up the kitchen, which made an 11 centimetre bump in the middle of the house. And it was very obvious when you walk down, and it still is, quite a slope. So some guys came back, cut a hole in the floor, did something under there, and they got it 2 centimetres down.
In the end, new piles were put in and the areas that were sinking were re-levelled. Until...
When they raised the house, there was quite a gap. So I put bricks along so my puppies could get in there. And they've actually fitted under the house. And then I thought, no, I'm pulling them out just in case the house does sink, and then I won't have my bricks. Within 2 weeks, it had dropped.
On closer inspection, we can see that this part of the house, the lounge, is sitting below the top of those bricks, which were initially placed under her house. But for Bev, going back to EQC at this time was something she could not bear.
Since my son ended his life, and I've become very unwell from that, so I didn't want to cope with it. I couldn't cope with anything else. And then EQC rang me up and asked me why I hadn't paid my $400 excess. So I told them I wasn't paying them anything. They were not getting any money out of me because my house was worse, and they better come and fix it.
That $400 excess covers the earthquake insurance from 2010 and 2011, where a bit more than $15,500 was spent trying to fix the house up. She received that phone call and a letter from EQC requesting payment in 2016. Since then, Bev and a few supporters have been trying to work with EQC to try and figure out what it will take and cost to get the place fixed. But no settlement had been reached, and it was starting to take its toll. After Bev's son, Quentin, committed suicide, she developed leukemia. She is also bipolar, which she has to manage with medication.
This leukemia may not kill me, but it's actually damaging my organs and everything all the time. Have very low immune system and chronic fatigue. It gets really hard to do anything, let alone paperwork and phone calls to people like this.
But Bev is only one of thousands of people who still have open claims with EQC. As of February this year, 2,123 people had outstanding claims with the organisation. And claims are still coming into EQC. In that same month, February 2019, 641 claims were closed. However, another 444 were opened or reopened. So we went to EQC to try and figure out where things are at. We interviewed Beverly last Friday and went to EQC the same day to request an interview. EQC called me on Monday, confirming an interview with its Deputy Chief Executive Renee Walker for later that day. But as we were driving to that interview, Bev contacted us. She said EQC had just offered her 2 settlement options, $34,000 with the option of going back for more if more repairs were needed, or a lump sum of $50,000. After 8.5 years of battling, Bev had her settlement. In our interview, Ms. Walker told us when she heard about Bev's case, she worked with the case manager to figure out what could be done.
My suggestion was that we look to settle at an amount that allows Beverly to deal with all of those unknowns. So we have 2 options. We pay the $34,000 and get quotes for everything else, or we settle at an amount that recognises that there is some risk and some additional damage to be allowed for. So today we have spoken both to Beverly's support person and directly to Beverly and made an offer to settle that outstanding damage along with the accommodation, and Beverly is happy with that offer, so that money will be paid to her and in her account within the next couple of days.
This is fantastic news for Bev, but it does beg the question. Please excuse me for being cynical, but why has it taken a call from a media organisation to get this rolling?
Good question. I think it's highlighted to us that we need to look for another option. I think we were working within a system that we thought was serving Beverly, and actually your call shows that perhaps it wasn't working for her, because if she felt that she needed to come to you, it clearly hasn't been working for her. I think it put extra priority for everyone on finding that solution for her. So I haven't spent the day reflecting on why. I think the best thing is that there is a good outcome for her, and as I say, perhaps it's about looking at whether the system is working or not working for people in Beverly's situation.
There is still some way to go for Bev. She still has to arrange to get the work done. But she can do that now with some semblance of financial security, including funding for accommodation while the work is done. After 8.5 years, she can now move on. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Now, if you have earthquake damage on your property and are also struggling with your insurer, whether it's EQC, Southern Response or any private insurer, we are keen to hear from you. You can email us, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, or you can send us a direct message on Facebook. If you want to send us feedback on anything else you've heard on the program, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz. It is about 12 minutes away from 6. The Council of Licensed Firearms Owners plans to go to the police about the way some firearms owners are being treated in response to new legislation banning some weapons. Police have been conducting armed raids to seize firearms since Parliament last month passed legislation banning semi-automatic firearms, magazines and parts. The Council's secretary believes some of the owners targeted by the police include those who made submissions on the Arms Amendment Bill. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
Adam Melnick bought an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle from Gun City the day after the Christchurch terror attacks in March. At lunchtime last Thursday, he was at home when a fleet of police cars arrived suddenly.
Basically, they just turned up out of the blue. It was quite, happened very quickly, A few cars come straight up the driveway and some parked out on the road in front of my driveway. Some come around the back, through them behind my sheds. Most of them were people, there were at least 8 of them, or 7 or 8 were definitely armed, and then there were a couple of plainclothes officers, more like the detective type sort of people.
Police confiscated his rifle, which was worth over $2,500, and $400 worth of accessories and ammunition.
It was shocking, really. It just felt so heavy-handed and unnecessary, intimidating, all those sorts of words, really. Just unnecessary, over the top.
The firearms seizures are happening around the country in response to new legislation banning certain types of weapons. Nicole McKee of the Council of Licensed Firearms Owners says the stories they're hearing have prompted consideration of a complaint to the police.
We're basically getting outline of stories of people who've been raided at different hours of the day and night, and they're varying stories, and we would probably like to collate those and then approach police about it.
Ms McKee is aware some of those raided had made submissions to the Arms Amendment Bill.
We think it's broader than that, but we do understand that some of these people have made submissions to the bill, yes.
Adam Melnick made a submission saying he was against the speed of the law change and the ban on semi-automatic rifles. He says he uses a semi-automatic centrefire for animal welfare issues. The 37-year-old doesn't think the raid is linked to his views.
I actually never thought about that, to tell you the truth. I mean, because the police said they were there because of my recent purchase, that's all I thought it was. I couldn't think of anything else, really, that it could have led to it.
RNZ asked the police for comment earlier today and is yet to get a response. Police have told the Otago Daily Times that many individuals had been spoken to as a result of inquiries following the attacks. They say it's part of normal policing and that anyone is welcome to make a complaint if they believe police have done something wrong. Adam Melnick says he hasn't yet been compensated for the items taken.
Well, no, I'm expecting it, that's for sure, yeah. I don't see why not. They did leave me like a receipt type thing, not a receipt, a documentation of what they took.
Mr Melnick says despite the experience, he's not planning on making a complaint. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
And let's return now to a story we brought you earlier in the program, which was about threats to staff at EQC. We've just received a statement from the Minister, Megan Woods. She says, I was informed on 1 May that a letter threatening EQC staff had been received by EQC that day. I was advised that security had been increased at all offices and staff had been informed of the threat. EQC is not in lockdown. I discussed the issue with the chair of EQC and have been following it since then. I was further advised that police are investigating the threat, says the Minister. She goes on to say, I understand a bullet was sent to EQC more than 2 years ago, and there is potential that the bullet was sent by the same person who has made the recent threat. This is part of the police investigation. I have not seen the letter. I was advised that the mosque shooting was mentioned in that letter. That statement from Megan Woods there about our story earlier in the program that threats have been made to EQC staff and that security has been ramped up as a consequence. US actress Felicity Huffman was at the centre of an emotional drama of her own making as she pleaded guilty to her part in a college admissions rort where she paid $15,000 to a fake charity to get her daughter into a top college. Huffman, who is one of dozens of wealthy parents charged over the university entrance scam, could face prison time after pleading guilty in a federal court in Boston to a charge of conspiracy. Maria Kramer was in court for the Boston Globe when Huffman pleaded guilty.
She became emotional as the charges against her were being described. Felicity Huffman, who looked very small, she's just this tiny little thing, and she's dressed in this very conservative gray dress, and she's clearly quite nervous. She was clutching a tissue almost the entire time. And when the judge asked her a question related to the charges against her, Felicity Huffman became very choked up as she described her daughter and a doctor that her daughter had been seeing since she was a little girl. And and Felicity said, I just want to make sure that it's clear that everyone understands that this doctor had nothing to do with this. Just like my daughter, she didn't know anything about my involvement. And that's when she really began to tear up. And then she said, everything else that the prosecutor said I did. And she was obviously quite shaken by the circumstances that she was in, and it was a very quiet courtroom listening to her, sort of tearfully explain as best she could what had happened.
What could happen to her? What are the possible penalties?
Well, at this point, it doesn't look, it's not clear if she will actually go to prison. The prosecutors are recommending 4 months in prison. This is on the very low end of the sentencing guidelines for a crime like the one she pleaded guilty to today. And nobody gets the impression that prosecutors want her to actually serve time. There's a belief that she's unlikely to serve time. The defense has the option to recommend no jail time, so the judge can make that recommendation. However, she was clear today that she doesn't have to accept either recommendation, that she can impose a more severe sentence should she choose to. But given that Felicity Huffman has no prior criminal record, she's clearly quite remorseful, and she, in terms of her responsibility here or the level of her crime, it's quite low compared to the other people who've been implicated in the Varsity Blues investigation. It's unlikely she will serve any time, or if she does serve time, it would be pretty small.
Is there any suggestion that she's going to pop up down the line as a witness?
That's a good question. I haven't seen anything like that filed in any of the records, and her case is pretty straightforward in terms of her involvement. So I don't think that there are many people she could testify against. She was very clear today that the doctor who examined her daughter, the reason why her daughter was able to get extra time to take the SAT, which kind of set the whole scheme in motion, that doctor had nothing to do with this. That doctor was clearly had been seeing her daughter for a long time, and her daughter does have an actual condition that allows for her to get extra time on tests. So it's unclear who Felicity Huffman would be testifying against, since everyone else has either already been indicted or has pleaded guilty. But it's a good question. Who knows? This is a very big case, so I hate to say that there's no chance.
So watch and wait. And what about, I imagine there was a great throng of media there, Maria, but what about people supporting Felicity Huffman? I didn't see her husband anywhere. Who was there?
Her brother. She came with her brother, who she walked in clutching his hand. He was there when she made her initial appearance as well, so he's clearly been quite a rock. And she was there also flanked by her attorneys and a person who's been handling her public relations. And no, her husband was not there.
For us in New Zealand, we look at this, and this is a lot of trouble to go to get into one of these colleges. I mean, is it that important in the States to get into one of these Ivy League schools?
Well, what's interesting is that a lot of these schools really weren't Ivy League. USC, University of Southern California, for example, which is one of the schools that's been at the center of all this, is a school with a very good reputation, for sure. But it's not an Ivy League school. Yale, of course, is one of the universities implicated, and that is Ivy League. But I think status. The United States is a country where I think it's easy to say that we don't believe in class, but I think it's quite clear when you look at the emphasis, the reverence with which certain universities and colleges are looked at, that class is important, and that having your child in a certain type of school is a reflection of you. And that's what's so toxic about what we're seeing here, is that and I think probably what has been so painful for these students, these children of whose parents did this, is that in a way, by telling them, I had to cheat to get you into school. Well, I was what you were saying to your children is, I just didn't think you were good enough, and so I had to go through and through these illegal means to get you into university, and that's very painful. And I think a sign of how much importance we place on these schools, and maybe that we shouldn't place so much importance on these schools, that perhaps there are other factors that we should be using when we're judging our children.
And that was Maria Kramer from the Boston Globe, who was in court today when Felicity Huffman pled guilty. It is a couple of minutes away from 6, so we've got a little bit of time for some of your feedback. Regarding our interview with Simon Bridges, this is off the back of Labor announcing that it's diverting about $200 million from its free fees policy into other spending because there wasn't as high a uptake as expected. This person says fair questions put to Simon Bridges that should have been answered. And this person says regarding National's education policy, 2 words, what policy? Wake up, Simon Bridges, says this person. Teachers are striking because of 9 years of education being run down by National. And Vivi says Simon Bridges' supposed support for teachers striking is laughable and completely cynical. His reasoning for National not improving teachers' pay and conditions due to the GFC and the Christchurch earthquakes did not preclude National giving millions of dollars per annum in tax cuts to the top 10% of earners while running down education, training, health and social services, selling thousands of state houses. How does National justify these actions? And Tessa says, please get Simon Bridges to name one single education policy that they have implemented that has been a success over the last 3 national governments. This one from Charles, though, who thinks that I was a bit mean, I think, to Simon Bridges. Oh, really? Really solid effort running interference and defence for Labor's free fees policy in your interview with Simon Bridges. Declare your political allegiances, says Charles.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The police are investigating an anonymous threat made against staff at the Earthquake Commission that references the Christchurch mosque attacks. This has been confirmed by the EQC chair to Checkpoint. Logan Church reports.
No further details have been released, but the Commission says there have been repeated threats, including one on May 1st, that threatened staff safety. EQC says it does not target a particular building or address, but it is increasing security for staff across the country. In a statement, its Deputy Chief Executive Renee Walker says people may experience personal stress or feelings of anger following a natural disaster or in response to interactions with EQC, and unfortunately a very small number chose to display behaviour that is threatening or offensive as a result. She says anyone with information that could help identify the person responsible should contact the police. In Christchurch, Logan Church.
The Prime Minister says there will be questions for tech companies about how they balance making profits against operating ethically. Jacinda Ardern is in Paris for the Christchurch Call Summit. That will see tech company and international leaders sign up to an agreement aiming to prevent the promotion and organisation of terrorism online in the wake of the Christchurch terror attacks. However, Jacinda Ardern says there will be questions about how global tech companies operate despite commercial sensitivities.
We've got to be able to have the conversation around whether or not commercial imperatives are driving certain behaviours that are ultimately harming people. The companies know that we're going to raise that issue, but they're coming and we'll start that discussion here.
Jacinda Ardern will attend the Voices for Action Summit at the OECD overnight, a meeting focusing on how to counter terrorists using the internet to spread their messages. The National Party says a $200 million underspend on the fees-free tertiary policy shows just what a failure it's been. Uptake of the policy was much lower than the government initially provided for. It applies to school leavers and those who have done no more than 6 months tertiary study in the past. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says there were generous estimations when the policy was first launched and the money will stay within tertiary. However, National's tertiary spokesperson, Shane Reti, says the funding has been poorly targeted.
It's a flagship Labor coalition government policy and it's clearly failing. We know that because the cabinet documents show that they forecast 80,000 learners in fees-free and in fact by end of year it was projecting closer to 50,000.
Shane Reti says the policy has good intent, but its delivery should be thoroughly reviewed. The UN Secretary-General has praised this country's approach to climate change. Antonio Guterres has met with Ngaitahu in Christchurch to discuss issues around climate change and global warming. He was accompanied by both the Ministers of Climate Change and Agriculture. Mr Guterres says initiatives taken by both the government and community groups are adapted to modern times, but also take into account the interests of the community.
And I'm very interested in learning with you how we can do better in order to make sure that we make such a rich agriculture fully compatible with our objectives in relation to climate actions.
Mr Guterres says it's becoming an example to others on climate action. WhatsApp users are being urged to upgrade to the latest version of the messaging service after the company revealed it had been hacked by what it called an advanced cyber actor. The company, which is owned by Facebook, said hackers were able to remotely use its service to install spyware on the phones of users. The surveillance technology was mainly used to spy on the calls of human rights lawyers. Dana Ingleton from Amnesty International says it's very invasive.
If it's infected on your phone, it basically gets control of your whole phone. It can see your messages, it can see your contacts, it can activate the camera. Governments are buying these tools to fight crime and terrorism, but we also know some governments with atrocious human rights records are buying this tool and using it to target human rights defenders.
Dana Ingleton from Amnesty International. According to Financial Times, the attack was developed by the Israeli security firm NSO Group. Auckland e-scooters will automatically slow to a maximum of 15 kilometres an hour under a new council licensing scheme. The second phase of the city's e-scooter trial was announced today, with Wellington-based Flamingo becoming the third company to take part, along with Lime and Wave. Auckland Council Licensing and Regulatory Compliance General Manager Craig Hobbs says while the council can't enforce speed limits via geofencing, all three operators have agreed to introduce it.
Through the first trial and the issues we had around injuries, mainly related to speed, we spoke to all the operators when they put their applications in and sort of encouraged them to consider geofencing as an option to ensure extra safety, and all of them have come to the party on that.
That's Craig Hobbs from Auckland Council. It's coming up to 6:05. The fallout of losing coach Mark Rudin is starting to hit the Wellington Phoenix. The A-League goalkeeper of the year, Philip Curto, is leaving the side after just one season. Curto is joining Melbourne expansion club Western United, where Rudin has been tipped to coach next season. The Phoenix are battling to retain their best personnel, including A-League Player of the Year Roy Krishna, who is yet to commit to a contract extension. The Central Pulse will host the final of the ANZ Netball Premiership in Porirua on a revised date. The team's three home venues were all booked on the scheduled finals night of Sunday, June 2nd, but instead of taking the match away from the Pulse region, Netball New Zealand have moved it back to Queen's Birthday, Monday, June 3rd. The Blues co-captain Patrick Tuipulotu says finishing second best in the battle to communicate with the referee contributed to their frustrating Super Rugby loss to the Hurricanes last weekend. Despite dominating territory and possession, the Blues fell to a fourth straight defeat with a 22-12 loss at Eden Park. Tuipulotu says the superior ability of a couple of the Hurricanes All Blacks to influence the referee contributed to the home team's demise.
When you have someone as good as TJ who's good at talking to the ref, and Glenn Barrett next to him, always in the ref's ear, I think that plays a big part of game management, and I think we came off second best in that area, and that helped the frustration levels get higher as well, and just the amount of ball we had, possession, and the way we couldn't really put the ball down, it all adds up.
Patrick Tuipulotu. Meanwhile, the New Zealand Māori rugby side have been confirmed to play Fiji in a home and away series in July. Match 1 will be in Suva, with the return fixture in Rotorua. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Song Crush checks out the dark side of folk and some bright things that pop. We have a window on the world of the internet of machines, when not just your computer, but your fridge is online. But what happens when your dishwasher starts talking to your vacuum cleaner without you knowing? And Eric Brenstrom has the world's weather covered. Turns out a large chunk of the world has recently been covered in floodwater. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And RNZ National with Indira Stewart is setting up your news day on First Up from 5 a.m. tomorrow morning, before Corin Dan joins Susie Ferguson on Morning Report from 6. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The northern and central North Island from Northland to Taumaranui and Taihape, including Bay of Plenty. Cloudy periods, isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairirapa, mainly fine, but a few showers early in the morning. Westerly gales gales south of Hastings tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, Marlborough and Nelson, a period of widespread heavy showers early tomorrow with possible thunderstorms, then clearing south of Manawatu. Canterbury, rain about the Western Ranges and showers elsewhere this evening, fine weather tomorrow. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, heavy falls and squally thunderstorms, easing to showers later tomorrow. Otago and Southland, scattered rain today, a few thunderstorms about Southland. Showers tomorrow, especially in the south. Westerly gales, especially tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a period of rain tomorrow. You're with RNZ National. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Let's return now to our top story this evening, which is about threats received by EQC, threats against their staff. Joining me now is Renee Walker, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of EQC. Good evening. What could you tell us about the threat which we've been told was received on May the 1st?
Hi, Lisa. Yes, as you have covered earlier in the bulletin, we did receive an anonymous threat on May the 1st, and as a result, we have increased our security across sites while we work with the police to investigate the threat.
What was the nature of the threat?
The threat was non-specific, so it talked about staff, but not in specific location, about danger and threat to our staff, but without naming people or locations. But as with anything of this nature, we're taking it very seriously and making sure that we investigate and try and just get to the bottom of whether the level of threat is real, perceived, and what we need to do to support our staff through this period.
So when they mentioned staff, did they mention hurting staff?
Sorry?
Did they mention in the letter plans to hurt staff?
Yes, they did.
How so? What did they say?
I can't recall the contents of the letter at this point, and I can't go into a lot of detail because there is a pending police investigation, but it does talk about causing harm to staff.
Did the mosque shootings feature in the letter?
Yes, they were referenced.
And how so?
As that being a warning and as something that we needed to consider, more so, again, just in the context of that had just happened and joining the two together.
So how did the threat arrive and who received it?
The threat was received in the post, and it was received actually by another department of government because it was non-specific. It was addressed to EQC but without specific location details, so it did take some time to get to us.
So, Renee, it didn't have a particular person's name on the address, as in addressed to anyone in particular?
No, it didn't. It talked to EQC staff and management. It was addressed.
So the Minister has confirmed that EQC was sent a bullet at some point, but that was some time ago, correct?
Yes, we have received a number of threats over the years, and again, we are working with police to see if there's any link between all of the threats that have been received.
So why do you think there is potentially a connection between this most recent threat and the bullet that you were sent about 2 years ago?
There are similarities in the letters received, but again, without the police investigation having been completed, we can't speculate on whether they are the same sender. There's no specific details, so none of the threats that we've received name a sender or give us detail about who that person is. So the police will follow that line of investigation and they will be the ones to confirm whether they believe they were sent from the same person.
Right, so the bullet arrived with a letter as well, obviously. So yes. What was the nature of that letter?
Very similar, so non-specific, but talked about the bullet being a warning as per the mosque shootings being referenced as a warning. So again, non-specific, not talking about individuals, but more just making threats against staff.
Were there common phrases in these two letters or common references?
the police are looking for that type of detail. Similarities, as I said, were that they were non-specific but threatening harm, and the police are just looking at whether they are potentially from the same person.
Renee, you say you've had a variety of threats. I mean, how common is this? How often do you get threats, and what form do they come in?
So obviously there's a lot of people that are unhappy at times, and they can range from verbal abuse through to the more formal threats. Our formal threats are less frequent these days as we're dealing with a smaller number of claims, but we take anything that is a threat towards our staff or our staff's safety very seriously. Obviously, if there's any threat of violence against staff, against contractors, or people threatening harm to themselves, we do everything we can to make sure that we're putting measures in place to keep people safe.
Yeah, when you say measures in place to keep people safe, are some staff feeling like they don't want to be in your work environment, that they feel unsafe?
We check in with staff regularly, so we have put increased security in place, and we are running situational awareness training sessions. We are updating them on a daily basis. We have an incident management plan. On the day that the letter was received, I was in Wellington but flew straight back to Christchurch to be with the team here, because obviously the team has obviously been affected by the mosque shootings in March as well. And while we have a number of customers still under enormous pressure and strain, we also have staff working in an incredibly difficult context at times. So we put everything in place that we can to try and make sure that staff do feel safe coming to work. We have counsellors on site so they can talk to us if they have additional requirements or if there's anything that we can do to help with that. But absolutely, and particularly after March 15, there were a number of comments about people not feeling safe coming to work, and we, again, take that very seriously.
Renee, just before you go, the stamp on the letter, I'm assuming it's stamped here, where did it come from?
There wasn't enough detail to be able to ascertain that. So again, that's a line of investigation that the police will follow up on.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That's Renee Walker, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of EQC, talking about a threat that they received in the mail on May 1st and increased security at EQC as a consequence of that. It is just after 6:15. Business owners affected by the construction of Auckland's City Metro say they're going out of business and are angry no one will compensate them. It comes as the City Rail Link's deadline in the CBD has been pushed out to the end of 2020, and the wider project encompassing Lower Queen Street and Mount Eden Station will be completed in 2024. And while small businesses struggle to find a voice to complain, one major hotel chain is threatening legal action. Alex Perrottet and cameraman Dom Thomas went to dodge the road cones on Albert Street.
Out on the noisy Albert Street worksite, the City Rail signage says business as usual. But pop inside the iconic Shakespeare Hotel and you can hear a pin drop. Patrons driven away by the trucks, the dust, the vibration and the lack of access. Sunny Kaushal owns the bar and the restaurant and has the chairs permanently up on the table. He says it's not looking good and some owners have already been forced to close.
So the remaining ones of us, we are trying to live day by day. It's like dying a slow death. That's the situation that we are going through. Talking about just one business, if we talk about the Shakespeare, which is given to New Zealand from last 120 years of service, now we are losing on an average about $500,000 per annum.
Sunny Kaushal says he's been able to compensate his business with other income, but he can't keep doing so, and last year had to let people go.
We had to lay off the staff, and that was very, very sad situation. And similar is the case with other businesses. They cannot afford, but without the staff, we cannot survive as well. So it's a catch-22.
Construction began back in 2016, and although some delays are always expected with large projects, news that the deadline has been pushed out to late 2020 has devastated the small business owners. Shovana Ranchoji runs the Roma Blooms florist on Albert Street and took a gamble before the project started. She bought out the cafe next door, hoping increased income would more than cover the increased rent. She says her decision was based on advice that if the metro project went ahead, they'd be relocated and compensated. But the plan changed, and authorities decided they wouldn't need to relocate anyone, leaving Shavonna and her neighbours badly exposed, or better, completely covered up with hoardings.
That was hard. Yeah, a lot of businesses, even though my business didn't have a hoarding in front of it, because the other businesses were so impacted, their customers stopped going there. That meant the traffic flow stopped coming to our shop, so it's affected us quite badly.
Bruce Glover owns the Mexican cafe around the corner and says City Rail Link wouldn't even help to put advertising on the wooden boards to try to minimise the impact. He says despite his complaints, he hasn't had any direct contact from City Rail Link or Auckland Council.
Nothing at all, no. Just that original letter about we're going to knock the building down and then no letter to say no, we're not. So yeah, it's kind of like nothing really happening.
And what do you think they should do?
I think it would be nice if they could, compensate the owners for their losses. At least acknowledge that there are difficulties going on, and I think that would be the minimum they could do. But hearing nothing from them is a sort of slap in the face of it.
Many local small businesses here say they're upset at the lack of communication from City Rail Link Limited as well as Auckland Council. Some of them had a meeting in a cafe in the first year of construction quite a while ago where they aired their grievances, but they heard nothing back. Only yesterday did some of them receive an email asking for a second meeting, but there was no talk of any compensation. Some of those small businesses are now getting together to fight as a group. Other bigger players, like the Stanford Hotel behind me, are threatening legal action if City Rail Link Limited does not cease and desist its current works, or at least start talking about some form of compensation. The hotel chain threatened they would file an injunction in the court, but the CEO of City Rail Link, Sean Sweeney, says that hasn't happened and they're in ongoing discussions. Sean Sweeney says there's a whole host of reasons for the delays.
Very narrow site, constrained working conditions. They made assumptions about how fast they could go, which unfortunately didn't play out. There was a lot of bad weather. It basically rained for 6 months at the back half of last year.
And he says those delays were compounded by Auckland Council asking for further works to be added to the brief. Auckland Council sent a letter to businesses saying it couldn't even offer compensation in the form of rates rebates. These business owners say that's hard to swallow, considering the council bailed out Eden Park to the tune of $63 million and has compensated other big businesses. Mr Sweeney says City Rail Link is reapproaching the businesses, but he has no money to hand out. The project itself is already blown out by $1 billion.
Well, I don't have a budget for it. I don't have a remit from the sponsors of the project, and perhaps more importantly, we don't have any mechanism to assess compensation, and the Public Works Act is probably a better place for those things to be assessed.
That means if these business owners want some chance at financial relief, they'll have to turn out their pockets again and instruct lawyers. Alongside Sunny Kaushal at the Shakespeare Hotel, they say they're all in favour of the project, but if they go out of business before it's completed, then it's certainly not all's well that ends well. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And it's 21 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The UN Secretary-General has expressed his solidarity with Christchurch's Muslim community while visiting the two mosques in the city attacked by a lone gunman on March 15. Antonio Guterres laid flowers at both the Al Noor Mosque and the Linwood Mosque to honour the 51 people killed and 38 injured. He later visited Ngaitahu to talk about climate change. Our reporter Andrew McRae was at the Al Noor Mosque.
The Secretary-General arrived at Al Noor and laid a large bouquet of flowers near the entrance to the mosque. He then met the Imam, Gamal Fuda, and half a dozen other members of the Muslim community before going inside. On his way out, Mr Guterres thanked the Muslim community for their welcome during the holy month of Ramadan.
Ramadan is a season of reflection, remembrance and renewal. And I'm here to express my deepest condolences, my profound respect and the fullest measure of my solidarity to you, your families and the community.
He said there were no words to relieve the hurt, sorrow and pain, but he wanted to pay his respects.
Like so many around the world, I was so moved by the poignant stories of compassion and grace from Christchurch. But in many ways I was not surprised. This community reflected a spirit that I've always known to be deeply embedded in Islam, a face of love, compassion, forgiveness and mercy.
Mr Guterres warned that hate speech is spreading around the world.
Social media is being exploited as a platform for bigotry. We must all show solidarity in response to this dangerous upsurge in hatreds.
The Secretary-General says he wants the UN to respond to hate speech and come up with a global plan of action.
Hate speech is spreading like wildfire in social media. We must extinguish it. And there is no room for hate speech, online or offline.
Tony Green, speaking on behalf of Imam Gamal Fuda, says the Muslim community was touched by the nature of Mr Guterres' heartfelt recognition of what they'd gone through.
And his profound knowledge of Islam, so the generosity of his words was really quite touching. But it was a heartfelt respect for initially the surprise that this could happen in New Zealand, and then just a great respect for the nature of the response that's come out from the community and also obviously within the context of New Zealand itself.
The president of the Muslim Association of Canterbury, Shagaf Khan, says the visit by the UN Secretary-General was a real honour.
And every time somebody, influential people like him comes to our mosque, we feel very humble. So, and community also feel very humble. We're still in grief, It gives a great comfort.
Te pō nui, te pō
Manu tiria, manu tiria, manu erohia ki te poho te raka.
Ngāi Tahu Kaumātua Sir Tiffany O'Regan welcomed Mr Guterres to Ngāi Tahu's office in Addington to talk about climate change. Mr Guterres praised this country's attitude towards global warming and climate change and the initiatives being taken, including more sustainable agriculture.
More adapted to the requirements of the modern times, but at the same time taking into account the deep interests of the community. And I'm very interested in learning with you how we can do better in order to make sure that we make such a rich agriculture fully compatible with our objectives in relation to climate actions.
Mr Guterres is expected to fly out of the country later today. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
Drivers eager to save money at the pump were happy to queue for today's opening of the new Waitomo petrol station in Upper Hutt. Fuel prices regularly reach $2.30 in the region, but today 91 unleaded is 40 cents cheaper at the station. Other fuel retailers are already dropping their prices in response, which is a welcome relief to locals who say they've been feeling the pinch for too long. Mariana Johnson reports.
So here we go, first full, Waitomo, Upper Hutt.
Mother of three, Karen Burden, was the first to receive the discounted fuel, though she didn't have to wait and wasn't even paying for it. She was the lucky winner of a $1,000 fuel voucher that she says will mean she can put a bit more away for a family holiday.
I'm still buzzing and kind of not really believing it. It's still quite surreal. It's a massive saving with the fuel prices anyway, so I was just happy for them to be here. But to have free fuel for a few months of the year, it's going to be huge for our family.
Cars were lined up down Ferguson Drive even before the signs were switched on at midday. Bruce McDermott was first in line, waiting an hour and a half.
Well, we've been waiting for them to come for a long time, and I wanted to be the first one to welcome them, which I did.
Mr McDermott says that it has brought much-needed competition into the region. Jimmy Barnes drove all the way from Wellington.
Yeah, I lined up for about 20 minutes, but I mean, it's worth $20 to me. Yeah, I'm quite happy to give these guys my business if they're going to give me cheap gas. Yeah, I've got 3 kids, and it costs a lot of money to put petrol in the car.
He says he can't wait for the opening of the Wellington shop in July. Upper Hutt Mayor Wayne Guppy says the region has for too long paid the highest prices in the country.
People are saying thank goodness, and I think there's a bit of a backlash from the traditional retailers where they're saying, well, have you held us at ransom for so long? How come suddenly Waitomo are about to open and you're dropping your prices? So yeah, I think that's why there's a lot of interest in the community.
At petrol stations all along Ferguson Drive, retailers were dropping their prices by up to 14 cents. Managing Director Jim Ormsby says there's still a place for the petroleum industry in New Zealand, even as the government seeks to reduce CO2 emissions to zero by 2050.
It's also aligned to the increasing competition in the retail fuel market, so kind of two things there really. I would say that the sites that we are building today are, really environmentally friendly as far as the gas station goes. All the right protection is in place, and as I said, we've got VR2, which is, reducing the amount of emissions from gas stations.
He says that the extra low prices won't stick around, with 91 unleaded likely to increase to $2.05. Drivers have until midday Thursday to fill up super cheap. For Checkpoint, Cormediana Johnson, TNA.
And quickly returning to our story about threats against EQC staff, the police have been in contact and say they are conducting an investigation, but they can't comment any further at this time because that investigation is ongoing. That's all we've got time for today, but we're going to leave you with this from Hollywood actress and singer Doris Day, who has died aged 97. Have a wonderful evening. Back tomorrow.
Indeed. RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police are investigating an anonymous threat made against staff at the Earthquake Commission. The Prime Minister says tech companies will have to think about how they balance profits versus ethics as she pushes for an agreement in Paris on preventing the promotion of terrorism online. The National Party says a $200 million underspend on the fees-free tertiary policy shows it's been a failure. And Auckland e-scooters will automatically slow to a maximum of 15 kilometres an hour under a new council licensing scheme. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
They're not fearing this investigation. In fact, they hope it will give him a chance to clear his name.
Lately is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.